Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to my home. Today I'll show you how to build a garage organization system. It's sort of like a French cleat with a little twist. If you joined me in my last videos, you saw me frame out this wall, add the insulation and the electrical. Head over to my channel if you want to learn how to do those projects. If you enjoy this video, give it a thumbs up or leave me a comment. And if you have a moment, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. So if you're ready, let's head to the shop. To start this project, I measured the length of the wall, keeping in mind that there's a set of stairs and a small notch to be cut out. I also measured the height from the floor to 48 inches just to make sure that I wouldn't have to notch out space for these outlets on the first board. I transferred the measurements to a 1/4 inch sheet of Baltic birch plywood and set my circular saw depth to just below a 1/4 inch. My table saw is kind of small to handle this full sheet of plywood, so I usually cut full sheets of plywood on the floor. I've got this handy straight edge that will easily grab onto the edge of the 1/4 inch sheet of plywood. I wrestle the plywood into place and secure it with some screws at the stud. For the second sheet of plywood, I'll again measure the length of the wall, keeping in mind that the first board had to be shortened because of the staircase. And then I'll carefully take measurements for the outlets. It's really important to be sort of meticulous here, as the piece of plywood will be kind of unforgiving. I'll transfer the measurements to the 1/4 inch sheet of plywood and mark them out with a straight edge. Again, I'm going to take my time with this process because I don't want to mess it up. The last thing I want to do is cut another piece of plywood to length and then cut out the outlets again. Since each outlet is the same size, it's easy to mark the width. I'll pre-drill a hole where each outlet goes, and then I'll use my jigsaw to cut it out. I don't use my jigsaw very often, and as you can see, I'm not particularly skilled with it, but I get the job done. In the end, I have two perfect rectangles, even if it took some extra cuts and about 10 years to get it done. To do this, I just left the piece of plywood on the floor and elevated it slightly so that I wouldn't end up hitting the insulation beneath. Once the outlets are cut out, then it's time to put this big piece of plywood on the wall. This is a time when I kind of wish I had someone else in the shop with me, but it's only a 1/4 inch sheet of plywood, so it's not very heavy. It's just sort of awkward. Again, I'll secure the piece of plywood using some screws right into the studs. For this final sheet of plywood, I'll use an attachment for my circular saw to cut it to width. And then it's just a matter of securing it to the studs using screws. Before I apply the cleats, I like to put polyurethane on the wall. The polyurethane deepens the color of the Baltic birch, but also provides a little bit of a water barrier just in case something were to happen. I always apply it beneath the cleats because it's easier than trying to get behind the cleats once they're installed. Isn't that pretty? The next step is to cut the cleats. So I put a 3/4 inch piece of plywood down to cut out some smaller sections. If I had a larger table saw or better outfeed, I could probably take this full sheet of plywood right to the table saw, but because I'm using a job site saw and I don't have an outfeed table, I'll cut the 3/4 inch sheet of plywood into more manageable strips. I'll set my table saw fence to 3.5 inches and raise the blade to just over the thickness of the 3/4 inch plywood. Then it's just a matter of cutting out the strips. Now here's the main difference between this system and a normal French cleat. I'm not using a 45-degree angle. This does make things a lot easier. I don't have to set my table saw to 45, and there's no risk that those 45 degrees are going to become smashed over time. Whenever I look at a French cleat wall, when it's first done, it looks so pretty. But then over time, that 45-degree point really seems to deteriorate. And probably the biggest benefit of this system over a normal French cleat is you don't even need a table saw. Since you're not cutting 45-degree angles, you can do all this work with a circular saw. And I know this from experience. I made this system for the first time 15 years ago. I didn't have a table saw, I didn't have a drill press, I had pretty basic tools, and I got it done. The next step is to cut some 1/4 inch plywood strips. These I cut to 2.5 inches. It's kind of a repetitive process, but can be very therapeutic, especially since I get to have the garage door open. I set up these little outfeed rollers, and they seem to help just sort of control this 1/4 inch sheet of plywood. I used a 45-degree chamfer bit to soften the edges of the plywood. This isn't a necessary step, but I do find it makes things a lot nicer if I can just reduce the sharp points. I'll actually do the 45-degree chamfer on 3 of the edges. This 45-degree chamfer bit is actually really large, but I didn't actually raise it all the way, so it just creates about a 1/4 inch chamfer on the edge. I probably could have used a smaller bit, but this was the one that was handy. And just raising the bit slightly creates the look I'm going for. So now that I've chamfered out the 3 edges, I'll take the 1/4 inch plywood strips, some Titebond 3 wood glue, and some brad nails, and I'll attach the 1/4 inch strips to the edge of the 3/4 inch strips. This will create a small recess at the back. So the 1/4 inch strip is lined up with the edge that is not chamfered. And then I'll just tack them into place. Realistically, the nails are not necessary. You could clamp all of these and just let the glue dry, but I've got a lot to do, so it's more about speed and efficiency here. Again, another 1/4 inch strip, and I'm gluing it down to the 3/4 inch strip, right along that pristine edge that has not been chamfered. More strips. Again, it's a really repetitive process, just like any other large organization system. You're just gonna do the same steps over and over again. And what I usually do is stack these strips one on top of each other to let them dry. And that creates a better compression. Obviously, I'm not putting enough nails in here to clamp the whole strip down, but when I stack them, they'll create pressure on the boards beneath. Usually I'll let these dry up overnight because the next day I'm going to cut them to length. And it's kind of gross if you're cutting them on your miter saw and all the glue is wet. The first step at the wall is to add that first board and get it parallel with the floor. I have another organization system on the other side, and I'll line up the edge of the board with the existing cleats. Usually I'll put this as close to the floor as possible, even though it's unlikely that I'm going to be able to actually put something on this cleat. I'll put a cleat really close to the floor, more for aesthetics, or if I want to use a bottom cleat on something like a big cabinet. I'll line up the edge, and if you noticed, I pointed out that the void created by the 1/4 inch strip goes across the top. Again, that's where the cleat system comes into play. I use my patented foot clamp to hold this in place while I pre-drill the holes and countersink the screws. For this system, the screws and glue are what's going to hold it in place and give it the strength to hold some pretty heavy stuff. Because the length of this wall varies, I actually measured and cut each piece individually. I cut them all at the miter saw, brought them back to the wall, added glue, placed them, and then screwed them into place. I made some spacer blocks. Once that first cleat was in place and marked as level, I just used the spacer blocks as I went up the wall. The process is actually pretty fast, but I was doing this while sort of completing some other projects, so it did take me, I think, a couple of days to kind of get the whole thing done, as this project was sort of a side project that I was working on while trying to do some real work. Here comes my shop supervisor, Pickles the cat. I think she thinks this new system is all about her. Yep, looks like it's Pickles approved. Pickles is a funny cat. She's deaf, so sometimes she shows up in the shop even when I'm doing really loud things, and I'm oftentimes worried that she won't notice when something happens. Now the dogs have to check everything out. It's fun to have shop assistants. Both Pig and Zach think they should be consulted more when I build things in the shop. Well, it's back to work, making sure that everything's level. When I get to the level of the outlets, I'll measure carefully to make sure the cleats line up closely with the outlet covers. I'll make sure that each part of it is level in case I need to use them in the future. And then it's on to the upper part of the wall. And it's kind of a boring process to do something repetitive, but the end result will be a functional and beautiful wall for my space. Once all the cleats are made and placed, I'll go over the entire wall, including the cleats with polyurethane. And here's how this cleat system works. On the back of a project, I'll place a 3/4 inch piece of plywood. I'll glue and tack it into place with finish nails. This will be located at the top and sometimes for larger items, also at the bottom of a project. Then, using this older circular saw that I've literally kept just to use for metal work, I'll cut pieces of 1.5 inch aluminum strips to about 4 inches. Then I'll move over to the drill press and make holes, but also create a countersink section for the head of the screws. If you don't have a drill press, you can use a standard drill for this. Just make sure you clamp the piece down well. I'll attach the aluminum plates to the project using screws, leaving about 1 inch of overhang. Here's how a 3/4 inch piece of plywood fits perfectly on the aluminum cleat. You can just hang the project right on the cleats. So simple. I think this wall organizer turned out amazing. If you're interested, I actually started with a bare wall here. I framed it out, added the electrical and insulation before I put this organization system in. Those videos will be on my channel. If you've got a second, leave me a comment. Let me know if you think this is a great alternative to the French cleat system. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and if you have time, subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you next time in the shop.